All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us for part three. So, I wanted to go over trends in public assistance that are important to note because these are sort of structuring our public assistance programs moving forward. Probably the most important idea here is devolution. People who are trying to reform public assistance programs are trying to devolve authority from the federal level down to the states. So, part of how TANF was sold to the public and conceptualized was that states would have a lot more leeway and a lot more ability to customize and be flexible inside of their programs so that states could experiment and find better ways of addressing that population. Now, there are devolved programs where experimentation does happen and has been very successful, including home and community based services for people with disabilities and the elderly. Unfortunately, devolution here has generally resulted in innovations and trying to get people off of TANF. Another feature of TANF was this structure of block grants. So block grants means that instead of paying a portion of each individual who becomes available and eligible for assistance, instead the federal government will pay states a fixed amount of money per year, and then the states get to spend that however they see fit. So the block grant structure was recently brought up in Medicaid reform. For every person that enters onto Medicaid currently, the federal government is on the hook for about 80% of those costs. State pays about 70 or about 20%. Um, so what block grants do is sort of take away that structure, and instead of paying a portion for each new person, the federal government will just pay a fixed amount. And inside of TANF, that is the amount that they were spending when welfare reform was passed. Another idea that is particularly important to me as somebody who cares about self-determination of people who are receiving welfare is paternalism. It's the idea that you can shape the behavior of welfare recipients by changing the laws. Paternalism inside of TANF is designed to change the sexual behaviors of women who are on TANF by trying to promote marriage and trying to avoid out of wedlock pregnancies and abortions. And it is also trying to change the labor behavior of mothers who are participating in TANF who may have decided to stay home with their kids because they valued that over having a low paying job. This ties in with the next idea of workfare, which is that welfare should only be for those people who work. And sort of the natural question that you have to ask yourself after that as a social worker is what about those people who don't work, who say, I don't want to do that? Do those people die? What programs do we do? What is the proper response for them? And what is the proper response for people who have who face these structural barriers to being able to participate inside of the job market? So part of the problem with TANF is that it really ignores those structural barriers that people might have, like low education, low skills, lack of access to the job market, lack of available jobs, sexism, racism, and discrimination in the job market. All of those things can work against somebody who's looking for employment. But TANF doesn't really do a good job of addressing them. We already talked about disentitlement. Part of the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan's plan for Medicaid was disentitlement. That's why he was very proud of the American Health Care Act that ended up not passing in the last Congress. Disentitlement is the idea of taking away things that people are entitled to by law and then turning those benefits into temporary programs or programs that can have a lot more conditions on them. And all of this is done under the aegis of personal responsibility. So people in poverty should rely on themselves, they should be independent, and that is sort of a value structure for public assistance. Public assistance is also affected by economic shocks, and we can see some programs that are a little bit more open to that. So food stamps, which we will talk about way at the end of this class, are very responsive to economic shocks. So the barriers to getting food stamps are pretty low. The barriers to getting TANF and especially SSI are very high. So people who may be in poverty as a result of an economic downturn aren't able to get the help that they need. And just from a political perspective, Republicans tend to attack a system that, as social workers, we view as very inadequate. So they are trying to dismantle this system. They're trying to take it from the federal level to the state level. They are trying to enforce more requirements on the people who try and get these or who are participants inside of these programs. And they're trying to make them not to be entitlements. Democrats generally are looking for incremental improvements to these programs. So Democrats will often try to propose changes to make TANF a little bit less oppressive, a little bit less paternalistic, a little bit more generous with funding, which is something with the funding that we did during the Great Recession. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of room here for more radical changes to the public assistance program that might actually provide a floor for people in poverty. So public assistance has really become more about labor policy. It's more about who can work and who doesn't than it ever has been. Public assistance has also become more about how much you pay in taxes and whether you get any tax credits or even refundable tax credits back from the government. As we talked about last week, a lot of redistribution happens within the tax system. And for people in poverty, they are only just now getting something through that program, largely through the earned income tax credit. And public assistance programs have also become more privatized as the systems, administrative systems behind them are contracted out to private companies whose incentive it is to try and shed or get rid of as many people as possible. So the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is a poorly understood program, is really the only one that has been enlarged over the last 20 years. People don't really know all that much about the Earned Income Tax Credit, and one of the barriers to getting it is simply that most people who might qualify for it might not either file taxes or know enough to check that box on the form. So one of the things that I would like to see happen is to really expand the earned income tax credit into what's called a negative income tax. So for people who work, they get wage supplements through the earned income tax credit. They get more money than they would ordinarily just through the regular wages. What a negative income tax would do is if somebody dips or is unable to work or loses work throughout the year, they don't lose those benefits. So negative income tax sort of sets a floor below which people will not fall. So if you make $0 in a given year, you get the absolute minimum. And then it sort of your benefits go down, they taper off rather slowly as you get more and more money and you're moving further and further up the system. So we talked a little bit about paternalism. I would encourage you guys to look at these videos, and they are done by the architect of the paternalistic welfare system that we have. His name is Lawrence Mead. These videos take place inside of Britain, where he was also instrumental after looking at the reforms that we did in the 90s. The United Kingdom went ahead with similar reforms about teenage pregnancy, unmarried teenage mothers, people who don't want to work. They try to address all of those things in a welfare reform package there as well. All right, we can't do that. So I guess I can't get your opinion on this, but for me, yes, we should definitely try to reform TANF. But we really shouldn't lose sight of the fact that TANF is in itself a really oppressive program. It is a highly sexist program. The studies have shown that people who are taken off of TANF rolls or who are punished inside of TANF, that those punishments tend to happen more often to African Americans, so it's often a more racist program. And it's also based on really negative ideas about people in poverty. As a social worker, I think that we should have programs that really try to honor people's self-determination and what they can do in life. And I would encourage you to look at the video that's linked here about basic income, which gives you a very quick once-over. If you are more interested in basic income ideas, I am really happy to talk with you about those. Okay, thanks everybody for watching. This is my first online lecture, so hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Please give me as much feedback as you can the next time that we meet. I want to review what you guys need to do over the next week because it is a bit different from what we're doing what we've been doing every single week. So you have your normal stuff. Critical questions are due. Journals are due by next class. But you also have stuff to do for today. By next class, I want you guys to participate in online discussions since we weren't able to do discussions in person. So you guys had critical question 8 due today. Please copy and paste that into the discussion board on critical questions. Then once people have posted their critical questions, make sure you comment on at least 2 other people's critical questions. They don't have to be from your group. They can be on any critical questions that you guys desire to talk about. And also, please copy and paste Journal 7. You can, instead of copying and pasting, you could also attach either your critical question or your journal. I don't really care if you copy and paste them or you attach them as long as people can read them. And after you post your Journal 7, make sure that you comment on 2 other people's journal entries. This is a bit of writing. I'm going to talk with you guys next week about this. I might count this as your last journal entry, considering you guys are doing a bunch more writing. But it's really the only way I could get you guys to discuss stuff without taking up a whole bunch of class next week. So I will be grading the discussion boards, and just like I do your discussions every week, and you'll be graded for how well you engage with the ideas of other people. So are you taking information from your critical questions, applying a nice professional perspective to it, and making sure that the person who posted and the people who are reading it are really getting something out of it, and that you are making that conversation deeper and more fulfilling and more filled with critical thinking. Cool. If you guys have questions on any of this stuff, please shoot me an email. This is my first time flipping a lecture like this, so I'm really happy to hear whatever feedback you guys have. Enjoy Halloween.